Buenos días a todos, ¿cómo están?
Hola, buenos días, Felipe, ¿qué tal?
Bien, gracias Raúl.
Listo.
Estamos ya todo en orden, todo listo. La escaleta la recibiste.
La escaleta, a ver. Creo que no la he abierto. Ah, aquí la tengo, vale, la escala enseguida.
Sí.
Para esta sesión ofreceremos traducción simultánea, inglés a español, español a inglés. Puede seleccionar esta opción en la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom. Si tiene dudas acerca de esta opción, le brindaremos asistencia. Si tiene preguntas para los ponentes durante la sesión, puede escribirlas en el chat de Zoom o YouTube. Por favor, recuerde mencionar su nombre e institución una vez escriba la pregunta. Al terminar la sesión, publicaremos la repetición en www.eventos.flar.net.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Iker Subizarreta. I'm CFO at Fondo Latinoamericano de Reservas, FLAR. Welcome to this first edition of our second season of our Cartagena talks. The prospects for 2021 are looking a bit better than what we lived through in 2020. However, it is clear that we still have to remain patient as the situation is still delicate. In the meantime, we keep leveraging these newfound remote work and collaboration tools that we discovered last year in order to remain in contact, effective, and above all, as safe as possible. As was the case in our 2020 Cartagena talks season, this is a space especially created to foster the collaboration and open communication within the official institutions of our region. We are once again very grateful that you are able to make the time to accompany us once again. We hope that you're safe, effective, and in good spirits, both in your organizations as well as in your personal lives. In the midst of what remains a very challenging economic, health, political, geopolitical, and social environments, we look forward to what seems, however distant, a light at the end of the tunnel. Our distinguished speaker today is Andy Blocker. In that spirit, I know that Andy will help us gain a broad perspective and make sense of a very fluid situation where every day it seems like the ground keeps moving beneath our feet. Andy Blocker serves as head of U.S. government affairs for Invesco. In this role, he drives Invesco legislative and regulatory advocacy initiatives with policymakers, engages with clients and opinion leaders on public policy developments, and seeks to maximize the company's political footprint. Prior to Invesco, Andy was Executive Vice President of Public Policy and Advocacy for the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association. Prior to that, he spent 5 years as Managing Director for UBS of U.S. Office of Public Policy. He also served as Vice President of Government Relations for the New York Stock Exchange, as Managing Director of Government Affairs, and was International Affairs Director for American Airlines. He also served at the White House as a Special Assistant to the President for Legislative Affairs. Mr. Blocker earned an MBA in International Business from Georgetown University and a BA degree in economics from Harvard University. We are very delighted and grateful to Andy and to Invesco for their support to this initiative that aims to keep us connected and to foster an open collaboration in our region, Latin America. I am very much looking forward to this session. Without any further ado, I leave you with Andy. Andy, many thanks for accompanying us today. The room is all yours.
Gracias, Iker. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm going to start with using a little bit of PowerPoint, but it will not be the entire session. So if I can use my technology skills here to bring that up, we will get started. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. And we'll go from here. Let's see if we can. Great. So let's just do a quick synopsis of where we've been, where we're headed here. I want to start with this. These are the job approval ratings for Biden coming into office. You can see that they're more comparable to Clinton, Bush, and Obama as opposed to Trump, who never got above 50% in his entire 4 years. But this is more back to normal of having a honeymoon where people on both sides of the aisle are giving you a shot. As you know, you can see it's lower than it was for Obama and Bush, and showing how divided the country remains even after the election, with a number of Trump voters still thinking that President Biden is not the legitimate president. But despite that, and I'll talk about this a little later, some of Biden's proposals are still very popular, even more popular than his approval rating at this time. So if we go from there, we'll just look at what he's done. He's come out of the box pretty hot here, and he's done a number of executive orders. I've got some categorized here, whether it's COVID-19 or health related, climate, immigration, or just moving the federal government in a direction. So you can see we've got highlighted in red those that are what we call just a reversal of what Trump has done. So these are part of his campaign promises, that he would withdraw from the World Health Organization, he would stop that and reverse that, that he would rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, that he would end the travel ban for people from Muslim majority countries, he would reverse and fortify DACA. So you can see a lot of those are Trump related. However, you're going to see more and more over time that in the future, less and less are going to be about Trump and more are going to be about his agenda. And as you can see here, most of those that are about his agenda are first and foremost COVID-19 related. The two key issues in the election were COVID-19 and the economy. And those are the two issues that you're going to see President Biden focus on like a laser. Those are the issues that got him elected, and those are the issues that will potentially get him reelected if he chooses to run. So he is focused on the COVID-19 response. He's got the federal mask mandate. He's got extending the federal eviction moratorium. There's a number of things there, but that's the headline from all these executive orders. If we look at each of these orders in total, most of them are popular. Most of them are more popular than not popular. Some are very popular. The mask mandate during use of public transit, extending the moratorium on evictions, just to name a few. Those are very popular because they're seen as directly related to COVID-19, and people really, really want to win the battle over COVID-19. But when you move into those that are more related to immigration, you can see they're less popular. They still may be above water in a sense of more people wanting them or supporting them than opposing them. But at the same time, some of them are not. So expanding the refugee cap from 110,000 by 110,000 the coming year, that is underwater. Only 39% support, while 48% do not support. But including undocumented immigrants in the census, it's a little bit above water, but it's not overwhelmingly popular like some of the COVID-19 things. People have asked me, okay, what was the one thing that surprised you from these early executive orders? And I'd say that it would be revoking the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. I thought that's something he considered. Didn't think he would do it day one like he did or in his early days. And so he did get some backlash for that from labor unions, saying it's costing jobs, and also the Republicans took advantage of that as well. But that was definitely a something for the environmental community. And so I'm not sure he's going to continue on that path, but he did make a statement when he did that. If you look at turning to just the fact that since the Georgia runoff elections for the Senate, where the Democrats picked up 2 seats to bring them to 50-50, with Vice President Kamala Harris being able to break that tie, you now have Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, albeit with slim majorities. So what can happen in that environment? Well, the first thing is, like I said at the beginning, the most important thing is COVID-19 and the economy. So you can see my first bullet, what could happen? Well, what will happen is COVID-19 relief. And you're going to see people talk about COVID-19, these bills in different ways. But when I talk about COVID-19 relief, I'm talking about the $1.9 trillion package that's currently before Congress and will pass most likely before March 15th when unemployment insurance runs out. When I talk about COVID-19 recovery, it's really about that the next bill that's going to be attached with infrastructure, and it's going to be trying to bolster certain industries that have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and especially in the in-person service industry, and the travel and leisure is right in the middle of there of that bucket. In addition, the COVID-19, the infrastructure part will be the typical things for infrastructure: roads, bridges, transit, airports, and especially broadband is something they're going to add to that, and also making things more green as well. The one part of that, like unlike the COVID-19 relief bill that we're on right now, part of the recovery bill they plan to pay for. Not all of it. The latest numbers I'm hearing, it's very early days, but upwards of 30% of it they would try to pay for. The part that's not related to COVID recovery, they would seek to pay for. So the bid-ask spread on that is anywhere from as early as June trying to get that done, which I think is a little ambitious, all the way to the fall. And the reason people are saying the fall is because that's when the highway bill expires, September 30th, and that's really more the deadline on that one. Also, other things that they can do on bipartisan basis, retirement reform, I think China policy, are things that Democrats and Republicans will get close on as well. Just to review the bidding here on COVID-19, we've already spent nearly $3.8 trillion on COVID-19 fiscal support through a number of bills. And so the 1.9 trillion would be on top of that 3.8 trillion. So there's been a robust response to this by the government, and I think you will see that continue. And then this is just an outline. You guys are very familiar with the relief package I've been talking about, but the main thing is the $1,400 stimulus checks, extending the unemployment. Minimum wage is a huge debate that's going on right now. The Senate parliamentarian is going to be deciding what to do with that today. And because of some arcane budget rules, essentially, what we're hearing is that if it's above $11, it's going to create a budget point of order. And if it's below $11, or if it's $11 or below, it will not. And that's part of the whole budget 10-year window issue they have with budget reconciliation. So for whatever it's worth, that's where that's at. And then you've had all the different things fighting coronavirus, including money to help schools open safely, expand testing, help with vaccination distribution. And then the big part here is the state and local government, the $350 billion to help support them that is in here. And that is going to be, that's a key part of this bill. Next, I will turn to the infrastructure bill. I've already talked about this a little bit, but we expect it to exceed $1 trillion. There's numbers all the way from $1 trillion to $4 trillion. There's a Biden's proposal's $2 trillion. The House Democrats had a bill called Moving Forward Act from last year that was $1.5 trillion. So somewhere in the $1 to $2 trillion is where I've been putting my bets. But if it's done on a bipartisan basis, outside of reconciliation, where you're going to need 60 votes, it's going to be on the lower end, 1 to 1.5 trillion. If they actually try to use reconciliation again as a tool where they only need 50 votes, you can see that number move up if it's Democrats only. So that's a long-term thing, but we'll watch that space. And then I mentioned to you that taxes will be part of this. So with taxes, having to raise some revenue for this, the things first out of the block that they're going to look to do are corporate taxes. As you recall, with the Trump tax cuts in 2017, you had it removed from 35% rate for the corporate tax rate all the way down to 21%. Biden's proposals to bring it back up to 28%. We'll see what the negotiations are. I think even some Republicans are comfortable going to 25 or 26%, but you're really, to raise the money they're looking for, that extra 2 or 3% to 28 is really what makes a difference. And then also instituting a new 15% minimum book tax. So it's essentially the equivalent of an individual alternative minimum tax to make sure that no matter how many deductions you have, you're going to pay taxes and, quote, do your fair share. So for any company making over $100 million, they would have at least a 15% book tax associated with them. Increasing income taxes as well. They're going to start with those over $1 million to make sure that they go back to the former top rate of 39.6%. I think it's at 37% right now. And then also potentially eliminating the preferential rate for cap gains as well. Those are big money raisers there. Financial transaction tax we've been hearing that's being discussed. The only problem with that is that it affects retirement accounts, both individual retirement accounts, pension funds. And so if they can find a way around it impacting that, they will probably have that as part of a pay for, but remains to be seen. Also here, I just want to talk about the monetary situation. Well, first of all, the U.S.'s speed and size of response, both on the fiscal side and the monetary side, was extraordinary. I think there were a lot of lessons learned from 2008, 2009, and the global financial crisis. And so, as we're moving to the next stage of this, with this fiscal stimulus on its way, there's been a lot of concern about inflation. And you can see here from that Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen, who were former colleagues at the Fed, are pretty much in the same space. And that, Janet's pushing that, look, the benefits will outweigh the costs, and that, this is the time to be bold. And Chairman Powell saying, well, look, even if this goes swimmingly well and vaccines are distributed and the economy starts bursting at the seams, I think the key word is he sees it as transient, that if there were any inflationary things would be transient. We would tend to agree with that. We can talk about it more later, but I think that bodes well for being more accommodative longer term. This is just a recap of kind of where we are as far as the balance sheet here and what's been going on with the Fed. I don't see any retrenchment from this in the near term. I think the number one goal here is to support what's going on. And then also, if you look at the Fed lending facilities, some of this, as you can see, the below the line on the December 31, 2020, those have all expired. So there's no more new money going into those. Above the line, they're good until March 31st of this year. So you can see that they're still fully equipped. They were retrenched a little bit after they passed the last bill on coronavirus. Take a minute on just the personnel. We like to say that personnel dictates policy. We've already talked about Janet Yellen. I had the opportunity when I was in the Clinton White House to brief her or staff her for her first hearing when she was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. I feel like she's the most qualified person who could be in that job. And as well as some of the other folks here who also had government experience. The economic team is definitely laser focused on making sure there's economic recovery here in the U.S. And I think you'll see that. The one thing is that Neera Tanden, who was the nominee for the Office of Management Budget, her nomination is in jeopardy at this point with Senator Manchin from West Virginia, a Democrat, saying that he will not vote for her. It's unlikely that they're going to find a Republican to replace that. So while she may not be the OMB director, they will find another place for her in the administration to contribute. Then look at the National Security Foreign Policy team. Once again, they're going with experience, old hands, people who've been in similar positions in the past and the people that Biden trusts and knows. And so you can see us moving towards a much more methodical, deliberate foreign policy. There's not going to be, policy by tweet anymore. And so it'll give our allies and our adversaries a kind of a clear picture of where we stand. And so it's kind of going back to regular order there. And we could talk about that more later if you like. Industries that we've been looking at for the last year, leading up to election and even now, are that things that would potentially be changed if Biden were to win. Fossil fuel industry with his commitment to climate is clearly one of them, and the commitment to green energy. Healthcare, pharmaceuticals, with one on COVID-19, but then also with him wanting to bolster Obamacare. Building trades, construction, if we've been talking about doing infrastructure for some time, we haven't actually gotten there. So I think we will get there this year. It's going to be a lot tougher than people think, but I think at the end of the day, they will figure out a way to get an infrastructure bill and infuse a lot of cash into that. And then technology. A lot of the tech companies are under a lot of scrutiny from both the political left and the political right, with some on the right feeling like they're being censored, and some on the left saying that you're not controlling harmful speech enough. So that's going to be a battle that continues. Not sure there's going to be much done in Congress, but there are a number of cases currently, lawsuits being filed by the Justice Department and then state attorneys generals. But they're most of those are on the antitrust side. So then lastly, I've talked about this just a little bit, but I'll close here. As far as foreign policy and trade and sanctions, look, like I said, you're moving from a very volatile situation where you had policy by tweet and you didn't know what you were getting each day. And so markets would react and it's like, oh, what did we mean, when it was just something that Trump thought of, and then staff had to catch up and implement what he wanted. And sometimes it was just a false alarm. So you're going to move from a very deliberate, measured approach that's going to be telegraphed. There may be even just leaking things to the press to kind of do a trial balloon. Does that work? But it's going to be back to regular order there. You're going to know where America stands on things, and it's going to be pretty much you're going to know the direction. And the other thing is that it's going to be much more multilateral as opposed to bilateral, and really engaging with multilateral organizations and with our allies. And then, but we're still going to go in the same direction, especially with China. So I think we've crossed the Rubicon with respect to China. I do not see Biden reversing course on China. I believe that what's going to happen is we're going to continue to look at them as an adversary, as a competitor, and cooperate with them when we can, but to know that they are an adversary. And so do not see the tariffs coming off anytime soon. I do think that the Biden administration is looking they have to determine, okay, if we're going to remove those tariffs, what do we want in return for those? And once they decide that, I think you will see the tariffs removed, but it's not around the corner that I can see. So you also have the South China Sea, you have Taiwan, you have all these other issues, and you have a lot of human rights issues, which we really didn't pay as much attention to in the previous administration. But whether it's Hong Kong or any of the other human rights issues over there, you're going to see Biden pay much more attention to that. I don't think it'll be the same direction with Europe. I do think they're going to kind of hold Europe to account, do their fair share with providing funds for NATO and things, but I think there won't be as much of a belligerent attitude towards them. And I think in Latin America, I think it's going to be a much more supportive, collaborative engagement. So I think that's all I have there. I'll stop sharing, and I guess we can move to the EAKR side of the show.
Many thanks, Andy. That was a very thorough review of what to expect from Biden and the role of the U.S. in the planet. I would like to perhaps dig a bit. I know that there is a interest from the audience and in general from the public about local politics in the U.S. So the perhaps two questions there. One is Biden a one-term president, given that, you know, it was already in question, him being 77 for one term, and then he would be 81 for a second. And how would that look with Kamala or not, or somebody else, or those kind of things? I know that there is a lot of speculation in that respect. And in that, a second question related to that theme is the future of the GOP with, I mean, I'm sure you have to say a lot to say about that, and Trump or not, and different factions. And that also relates to a question that we receive from the audience.
Okay, so let me start with President Biden. Look, President Biden's been counted out before. Everyone's saying he's a one-term president. He hasn't said that. In fact, the White House pushed back very clearly in the last week, saying no, he's looking to run for re-election. And whether he is or not, it doesn't matter. You don't say that you're not running for re-election, because you immediately become a lame duck, and people are no longer looking to you as the leader of the party. They're looking to see who else is running, who else can we get behind for 2024. So you're not going to see him show his hand on that. And I think it would be bad for the party for him to say he's not running already, because it would create a lot of chaos. So what he wants to do is he make sure he's getting the successes on COVID-19 and bringing the economy back. We want to focus on helping Democrats continue to hold power after 2022, and set up the next, whoever runs, whether it's him or another Democrat, has a good chance to win in 2024. So I think that's the calculation there, that even if he wasn't planning on running, he's not going to tell you, and it wouldn't be smart to do so. With respect to Trump, I think that it's very clear from every poll, from every action you see, that it is the Republican Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of Trump. And so it's overwhelming. And so when elected officials show deference to Trump, they're not necessarily doing it because they like him, they like his policies, whatever. It's because they like his voters, and they don't want his voters turning on them. We've seen that many, many times over the last 4 or 5 years, where if you go at Trump, his voters take it out on you. In fact, his first year or two, anyone who said anything bad about him was primaried and lost their reelection. So so among Republican voters, it's still 70%, which is pretty high for an approval post-presidency, especially the way his presidency ended. However, at the same time, you can't live with him. You can't live without him, but you can't live with him. So to the extent that if you want to be an elected official and you want to run for president, I don't think there's any path, whether it's Trump himself running in 2024, or whether it's someone who's in Trump's image running in 2024. That is not a recipe, at least today and in today's environment, to be elected president. Now, some of that depends on the performance of the Biden presidency, COVID-19, and the economy. But if President Biden is able to do a fair job on COVID-19 and the economy, there is no room for a Trump-like character to come and defeat him.
Okay, so staying in the elections front, and all the damage done by Trump's claim on the illegitimacy of the elections, or so on, is there permanent damage, you believe, or will this get will be water under the bridge at some point?
That's a very good question. I think it's too early to tell. I think this is probably the most damage that's been done with respect to people not thinking that the elected president is legitimate. People thought that Trump was illegitimate on the Democratic side. They thought that the Russians helped him, and they thought a lot of things there. But the difference was that the candidate and the outgoing president conceded and acknowledged his presidency. So the leaders of the opposition party basically said, yes, he's the next president. They did not add fuel to the fire. So you're always going to have your people on the left or the right, like not being happy that someone was elected and finding ways to not support them or consider them illegitimate. What we've never had before is the president of the United States, while still in office and even after office, refusing to concede and continuing to this day to say that President Biden is illegitimate president. And so with that as the backdrop, I think this lasts a lot longer and could be a problem, but I think it's more of a problem for the Republican Party, like I said before, because right now, if you look at the approval rating for the COVID-19 relief bill, it's in the high 70s, and 60% of Republicans are in favor of this bill. Yet the Republicans in the Senate are opposing it, partly because they want to galvanize themselves. But like, there's still things Biden is doing that's popular. And I think that's what he's focused on. He's not bringing Trump into the conversation. I think in his town hall a week or so ago, he didn't even say his name. I think he might have said it once, but he didn't really want to talk about it. So I think Biden's doing his best by use of the megaphone to move on. And I think over time it will wane. But in the Republican Party, there's going to be a civil war about, do we keep Trump with us or not? Right now, he's winning that civil war.
Related to that, one last question on the domestic politics. All these, the extremes in either party, the extreme left, if you will, progressives in the Democrats, and then all these, the extreme right in the Republicans, are they likely to be tamed and kept inside the party, or are we likely to see dissident factions in either one or both of them?
So Iker, I'm sorry, you cut out on me. I could not hear that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, so the question is, with extremes in both parties, on the the progressives and the conspiracy theories and the like, are they likely to remain in the party, or are we likely to see dissident factions spinning off from either one of them?
Now, that's a great question, because if you see in other countries, I mean, there's not really two major parties. There's multiple parties in Europe and Latin America. But in the US, they've stayed with the two major parties. I think for now, if I'm betting on this, I'm thinking you stay with two parties. You just wrestle it out amongst in both factions. I think it's easier right now for the Democrats to coalesce because they're in power. But when you're out of power, that's when it's really hard. And I think not sure how this shakes out. I do think that not sure what a Trump party would do. I mean, if you think about, it's more of a cult of personality. It's really about Donald Trump and the way he does things, as opposed to, there's no real connecting policies or positions. It's more of a feeling. And if you think about it, think about the Republican platform. So in 2016, when Trump was the nominee, he made some slight changes to the platform, the different policy positions. In 2020, there was no Republican platform. They got rid of it. It was basically Donald Trump. I mean, that should tell you something, right? So I'm not sure. I mean, we talk about how old President Biden is, but Donald Trump's not that much, younger. And so how long does that last? And if it's really centered around him, I mean, I'm hard pressed to see who the personality is to replace Trump, because a lot of people try to act like Trump, try to do some of the same things as Trump, but they get punished for it more than Trump. And partly because Trump had a 30, 40 year brand from other endeavors where it was okay for him to do that. And so he wasn't the typical politician. But that's why it's hard for Ted Cruz or Senator Hawley from Missouri or Marco Rubio, or it's hard for them to kind of take on that mantle. So I think going back to your actual question, I'm not sure. I don't think there will be a breakup of the party, but I do think it will debilitate the Republican Party for some time.
Okay, thank you. Well, I didn't give credit for that question that comes from Carlos Alvarez from Florida, and then staying in the domestic and then moving to perhaps the foreign front. There's a question from the audience. We encourage the audience to keep sending your questions. There is Tamara Herrera from a director at Synthesis Financiera asking how will the fiscal deficit caused by the reliefs related to COVID-19 be handled? How do you see these dynamics? I would probably include there the balance sheet of the Fed and so on.
Yeah. Well, look, I worked in the Clinton White House when we balanced the budget in collaboration with the Republicans in 1997. We had 3-4 years of surpluses. So we're a far cry from that. But I do think there's been a change a little bit in the thought process on deficits. And I think Trump, interestingly enough, as a Republican, kind of just didn't have much of a care about it. He's like, look, I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to do the tax cuts I need to do. I'm going to make sure the economy keeps going. And I think the Democrats are on the same path right now. And that's why this COVID-19 relief bill will pass and potentially infrastructure as well. What do you do with the deficits? Well, that's a tough question. I think what the Republicans now are trying to rebrand themselves post-Trump as those who are concerned about deficits. That's part of the reason the Senate Republicans are opposing this bill, saying it's too large. We're not in the same situation we were back in March of 2020. We're on a road to recovery. So you can see some of that messaging come forth. I do think that there's a bigger belief, especially with rates so low and the ability to borrow is much easier. There's not as much of a pressing case right now, because if you can lock in these lower rates for your government debt, it's not as big of an issue. But I do think it is something we do need to pay attention to going forward. I'm just not sure it's going to be a big part of the debate until we're fully clear of COVID-19 and the economy is fully recovered. And then I think you'll see the Fed kind of pay attention to this. You saw what happened when Jerome Powell tried to deal with it and try to reduce the balance sheet, and Trump started tweeting, and that reversed pretty quickly. So I think until we're in a full recovery, I don't think there'll be support for retrenching from the Fed balance sheet or to actually be dealing with the fiscal deficit either.
Yeah, we get a couple of reaction questions from the audience from Mario Acosta and Antonio Candia. One is talking about age. What's the role of the Democrats? How would you say the relief pitchers, if you will, and the role of Kamala Harris going forward. And another question is on the median voter in the US is shifting to the left. Probably they do not care much about the deficit, but inequality is their main concern. What other shifts in the medium term are you seeing going forward?
That's a really good question. And I like the relief pitcher reference. It's as if it's Mariano Rivera. You're comparing Kamala Harris to Mariano Rivera, the best pitcher for the New York Yankees in the history of the major leagues. I think that, I think Kamala has an opportunity to step in the gap if Biden does not decide to run in 2024, but I think it's going to depend on how she performs as vice president. What is her persona? Is she seen as, she has two jobs. She has a job to be seen as progressive enough and as not threatening enough to the center and the right, to kind of pull together the same coalition that Biden put together. But it really depends on, like I said before, it really depends on how we do in COVID-19 and economy. Those are the key issues. It doesn't matter who the candidate is. I think you also talked about the new generation. So yes, not only are they not as concerned about deficits. They're not concerned about socialism. It's like socialism in the United States has been a boogeyman term for decades, but that's mostly because it was tied to communism, right? And that form of socialism. And it's a Cold War. So I grew up in the Cold War, and probably many people on this call grew up during the Cold War. And so it had a different connotation. It was more of a us versus them mentality. If you look at the United States, I mean, we're not like Europe, but we're there's a spectrum between capitalism and socialism. And we, through our Great Society initiatives in the 60s and with Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, we do have a significant social safety net, and they're all pretty popular, especially when you're receiving those benefits. So I do think this new generation has a different view for some of those same reasons, and I do think that the other part is technology. There's much more. You guys know this. They're much more comfortable with technology. My children, or my son's going to be a senior at Georgetown, and my daughter's going to be a freshman at Harvard. They're so comfortable with these devices. I'm the Luddite. I'm the guy. I'm like, okay, how do you use that? I used to know how to do that. But they're also more global. So my kids both take Mandarin, and are very comfortable traveling, very comfortable. There's things that this generation does that just was not as common as what we do. The world is smaller for them for all sorts of reasons. And so that makes me hopeful for this new generation that they'll be able to solve some of these problems. They're also much more concerned about environment, climate change as you go down the spectrum. So that's going to move that issue up politically as they become a greater and greater share of the population.
Well, that's a great segue into probably the next line of questioning on Biden and the U.S. Going forward after all the retreats from the global stage and so on from Trump, and then Biden going back in this direction. He's rejoining the World Trade, the Kyoto Initiative or agreement, and the World Health and NATO and so on. How and perhaps you can comment on his views on ESG and what we could be expecting at that respect, both in the US and on a global stage.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great question. And this is probably one of the tougher assignments that this administration has. And I think that's why they've put in former Secretary of State John Kerry to lead our international efforts, and then have Gina McCarthy leading our domestic efforts on the environment, as well as some of the other seasoned hands at the different agencies that are going to impact environment and domestically. I think I'm just going to cut to the hard part about this. Okay, so the hard part here is, the easy part is rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. The hard part is actually effectuating change globally in the climate arena in a meaningful way. One, it is good for the United States to do its part with its own policies to reduce emissions, but it's equally as important how they influence China and India to do the same. We can jump incredibly in our efficiency and reduce our carbon footprint. But if we do nothing to influence China and India in that same regard, it's just one in and one out. And then if you add in emerging countries, emerging markets, which are going to have to rely on coal and other sources of energy, I should say, rely on cheap energy, which is coal today, for a longer run, you need to get as many of the players involved around the world to have that global impact that you're looking for. So my best hope is in innovation and technology, continuing to come up with things that are going to effectuate change. If you look at General Motors and their move towards electronic vehicles, that's a huge step there. But even with that, even if we move to electricity, you have to think about, okay, how are you powering the electricity? So, I mean, yeah, you're moving away from the internal combustion engine, but you still have a large footprint to create the electricity there. So like, what are the new technologies there, which are going to be not going to require the production of that power from the different stations. There's been a move more towards nuclear in the US. I mean, we really slowed down our nuclear program after 3 Mile Island back in the late 70s. I remember that vividly, watching that. That was a close to home event, and it really shuttered that progress. But yes, it creates the nuclear waste, but on the climate side, it's considered clean.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Another kind of line of question you did mention in your presentation about the adversarial role with China, and but one thing that comes to mind is, and you did mention also that you are a child, as I am, of the Cold War. Are we in a new Cold War in that sense, of different stage and different weapons and so on, and related to that, I do feel that there is, I would say, confusion in the planet, where say Europe or other geographies, particularly Latin America, knowing that China is, their growing influence, and also being their main client, and the US perhaps taking for granted Latin America for a while. How is this playing out, and what impact or not, what the stance and actions of Biden will be and his administration at this respect?
No, that's a great question. It's a very important question. So let me just start with just talking about Biden for a second. I think President Biden is the person for this time, given his experience as vice president under Obama. He knows foreign leaders well across the globe. He was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. This is old hat for him. He specifically was, Obama's chief envoy to Latin America. And so he's very sensitive to the issues there. And I think he's one of the few people who can come in and step in and work and hit the ground running here. I think with respect to America's place in the world, I think that there was a step back by our moving away from multilateralism over the last 4 years. And so we have some ground to make up, but I don't think we can go back to the way the world was before. I think that for a number of reasons, diplomatically, but also because of COVID-19, China has grown in its influence, and I think the US recognizes that. And while I don't think it's a quote Cold War, I do think, like I said, I want to use the term that they are a competitor, or they are an adversary in that respect. And so we have to compete with them. And I think the first competition is in Latin America. I mean, we do subscribe to the Monroe Doctrine, and that this part of the hemisphere is the most important to us, and we don't want any other world powers having too much influence in this region. But I think the price went up, right? The price went up over the last 4 years. We're gonna have to compete for the hearts and minds in this region. And I think if you look at what Biden has done with putting his first immigration bill, a big part of that is $4 billion for an interagency plan to address underlying causes of migration in the region. He's increasing assistance to El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. And so there's definitely things he's doing. I think on COVID-19, there might not be as much economic help on that, but there will be help as far as acquiring and distributing vaccines. And look, the region is an important economic partner. So getting COVID-19 under control is important to trade. Look, we do have the soft power, competition from China and Russia that I mentioned, but we think that in the long term, I think we win that competition. I don't know if I answered all your questions, but I did my best.
Yeah. No, I maybe digging a bit into that line. The Trump campaign made an effort to portray Biden as a weak, frail person, and what in the foreign stage, what we're seeing is a China ever bolder, and then we also have this other rogue states, if you will, Russia and North Korea sabotaging and doing all their cyber and fake news and all these kind of things, or at least blame for that. I mean, how, how do you view Biden making a stance or not, or what kind of style he's likely to apply, policies to implement, or drawing lines in the sand? You can also include in that rhetoric the Middle East and so on. So on the foreign stage, what would you expect from Biden?
So I think he's already begun this. You can see he's really focused on rebuilding alliances first and foremost. He did early calls to traditional U.S. allies. He's participating in the G7 and the Munich Security Conference. He gave a very robust speech there saying America's back. And while skepticism remains, President Macron, his comments about Europe not solely relying on the U.S. for security, that's understandable. I think everyone, including the U.S., is trying to be, okay, we want to be multilateral, we want to rely on our allies, but we want optionality, and we want redundancy a little bit, right? You're not going to have just one trade partner or one military partner along those lines. So look, I think it really, and I keep coming back to this, I think the COVID-19 recovery and response is going to really impact America's ability to exert influence in the world. If we do not handle that properly, if we don't get our economy back in order, it's going to hamstring us. So with respect to China, like I've talked a little bit before, I think the areas where we really can collaborate with them are potentially climate change and then coordination on COVID-19 and future pandemics. And all the trade and all the other skirmishes I've talked about, but those are the ways I think we can collaborate on them down the line. And then on the Middle East, I feel like we're really going to pull back. I feel like, we're working with Iran to see what remains of the JCPOA that Trump got out of. But I don't think us putting a lot of energy there because I think there's a fatigue when it comes to the Middle East right now. I think we want to be there to the extent we need to be, but it's not going to be our number one place, which I think leaves room for Latin America to be a much higher priority. With North Korea, since you mentioned it, look, that has I'm trying to think of the right word. It's befuddled many of presidents, and even though I don't believe Trump was any more successful, at least he tried something new. But I think at the end of the day, it's clear that they have nuclear weapons and they have more and more capabilities. And I think the minute that they do some more testing, I think of their nuclear, capabilities, it's gonna set off alarm bells, and we'll have to deal with it appropriately. But that is more of a wild card.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end. We only have 7 minutes, and I still have tons of questions and some other questions from the audience. So maybe I'll try to pack a couple questions and finish with a question from the audience. One on Central America and so on. Biden did make an announcement on wanting to have a stronger Central America, and while we were prepping for the call, we did mention that perhaps that's a more effective to build a way to build a wall than Trump's approach. And another question, trying to pack into this, is winners and losers on a global stage. So we have this did originate in China, but it was controlled fairly effectively, as has been the case in Asia, whereas in the rest of the world, particularly Europe and the US, and obviously Latin America, Africa, it's still wreaking havoc. So it seems like Asia is coming out stronger of this as a winner. And then the West, it's in a weaker situation. What would your thoughts be about these two respects?
So with Latin America, I think I just kind of reiterate some of this. I think this is an opportunity for Latin America and the U.S. I think Biden, with his knowledge of the region, with his commitment in the region. I talked about his immigration bill and what he's proposing there. I think there is an opportunity here to engage and to see the common interests of both the US and the rest of the region. And so, because I think as the rest, I don't want to say as the rest of the region goes, so goes the US, but the way the rest of the region goes, it definitely impacts the US. The US cannot ignore economic hardship or different things in the region or political instability, because it's going to impact us. And so I think the fact that Biden has spent so much time in this region, now he's president, I think bodes well for that. I think the fact that the US is moving to diversify its supply chains and diversify and go back to more multilateralism, is getting as many partners and allies as possible, bodes well for Latin America. It's a place ripe for that, given the connectivity over the years. And I think the key is how we position ourselves and how we approach it. And I actually see that being able to use, given the fact that China is going to be trying to do a lot of investment in the region, the U.S. using soft power in competition with China, and just being able to, China has the Asian Infrastructure Bank, but the U.S. could try to encourage both the IMF and the World Bank to invest in projects in Latin America to counter the Chinese investment. That all that bodes well for the region. Like if people are competing for the attention of the region, that's good. I do think people need to be careful. I'm clearly an American, so I trust us more long term, but that's enough of that commercial. If we go to COVID-19, I believe that China is the clear winner here. I mean, there's no other really way to look at it. If you think about it, they have, it's accelerated the timeline for them becoming the largest economy, because they've recovered much quicker from it. And, it's also not likely to be the last pandemic that we see. And so to the extent, and that's why I said it's good, it's important for how, and that's why I'm so glad that the president is so focused on COVID-19 recovery. If he's able to demonstrate we're able to, with relying on science and with really putting in the full weight of the federal government to help the country recover, if he can get that vaccine distributed, if he can get things back on track, that's going to build confidence with our allies that we won't be debilitated in the future, and that we'll be able to, the next time something happens, we won't be left on the sidelines. We'll be still engaged, and not only be able to recover ourselves, but then to help our allies. Otherwise, people are going to look more and more to the people who are doing the best job, which was clearly China this time. They definitely did a better job, but I never count the U.S. out. Just watch us this year. I think we're positioned properly.
That's a very interesting perspective. So we have time for one more question. This time from the audience. It's a copy from Andrés Cabrales at the Central Bank of Colombia. The question is, how could the 2022 midterm elections affect Biden's agenda if he loses majority in Congress? And will Biden try to pass his most important policies before those elections in order to avoid that risk?
That is a great question that shows a lot of insight. And I think you've answered the question with your question. And that is that he's going to try to get everything he can done, not just in the first term, but in the first year. And his most important things are COVID-19 relief and COVID-19 recovery with the infrastructure, because those are central to his ability to have a chance to hold Congress. I mean, he has one of the tightest majorities in the House, and he's 50-50 in the Senate. And normally, historically, I don't think there's been a time where in modern history where you've had all levels of government, at least in the last half of the 20th century, and then been able to maintain the House. So the assumption is you lose the House. So they're trying to pack in as much as they can, but by doing that, it also gives them the best chance to get reelected, because if the economy's recovered, if COVID-19 is going well, then when they go to the polls, they're gonna have a good chance. And the other wild card is Trump. Trump being the major influencer in the Republican Party, yet not being on the ballot, is not a good recipe for congressional Republicans in the House and Senate. And so if you have that, that's the formula for Biden maintaining Congress. If he does his job and Trump undercuts the Republicans in Congress. But we got a long way to go. So those are some big variables. But yes, the premise of the question is correct. They are going to try to pack in everything that they can now. And I think in these first two bills as much as possible, because the other bills are not going to be done with budget reconciliation. They're going to require 60 votes, and they're going to be tough to get done.
Okay, Andy, well, thank you so much. We have come out to the end of the session. I still, and we still have quite a good number of questions, but have to wrap it up. So Andy, this has been a fantastic session. Indeed, we are facing very complex and challenging times ahead of us, but as we all know, where there is uncertainty, there is also opportunity. So many thanks for your insights today. And once again, on behalf of Flower and me personally, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to you, our guest today, Andy Blocker from Invesco. And I am very certain that these insights contribute and add great value to the investments of the public resources of our institutions. And I would also like to very specially thank all of our audience today for accompanying us once again. We are preparing sessions, very interesting sessions for this season 2 of Cartagena Talks, and we hope that you can accompany us once again. So until then, stay safe and hasta la vista, amigos. And so many thanks once again, Andy.
Thank you.